to talk about what it means to be literate in the year 2016 or 15 or 18 or 20, what it means to be literate today in comparison to perhaps what it might have meant 10 or 15 years ago. So when I went to school, which is now, well, a distant memory for me in many ways, it was back in the 70s, in the UK, we had to stay in school until we were 16, and at the age of 16, we could make choices. We could carry on and study with a view to going to university. We could leave and get a job. We could go into vocational training, perhaps to become a mechanic or something like that. But in order to get to that leaving point, to the age of 16, we had to pass the basic tests of the British education system. And one of the keystones of that was to ensure that when people left school, they could do three principal things, and that is read, write, and do basic mathematics. In the UK, we call them the 3 R's, as you may know. That's reading, writing, and arithmetic, because they all begin with R, as I'm sure you know. Those 3 basic skills, and they were kind of the cornerstones of this concept of literacy and numeracy. And in fact, those 3 things have served us incredibly well for a long, long time. And it was really only when network technologies came along, when the internet came along, that people started to think that perhaps the concept of reading, writing, and arithmetic was not a complete picture of what it means to be literate these days. And this is where perhaps the term digital literacy came from. And around the world you'll hear different terminology for that. You'll hear digital literacy. You may hear people talking about digital competences or 21st century skills, all sorts of different names which people have tried to use to describe the concept of literacy these days. So, my talk is organised around a set of questions, and the first question is, what is digital literacy? We all know, I think, what traditional literacy is, but what is digital literacy? So what I'm going to ask you to do, because it is the end of the day and there will be people perhaps feeling a little bit tired, I'm going to ask you to turn to 3 or 4 people near you and just see if you can brainstorm in 1 minute a few ideas of what you think digital literacy is. Okay? I'll leave you to talk about that amongst yourselves. Okay, so maybe you've come up with a few terms or a few ideas. I'm going to be very foolish and see if anybody would like to shout out in a good, loud voice anything they think describes this concept of digital literacy. Any ideas? Internet, new technologies, ICT. Sorry? I'm already on Facebook. That's digital literacy. I've just gone on Facebook. Okay, so we've had a lot of people shouting out perhaps things connected with tools or things or computers. Any other skills perhaps that would make up digital literacy? Searching and selecting things, those are 2 very key skills. which I'll come back to. One more? I can't. Editing, thank you very much. People with better ears than me. I'm booked in for a hearing test on Tuesday, which may help. Okay, editing. So being able to change things, to download and change things or create things, and creativity is certainly a part of this. I'm going to show you a couple of definitions of digital literacy. Now, I hope the text is big enough for you to read. I suspect at the back it may not be, and I'm going to go through these because there are some important concepts in there. The first definition says that digital literacy is the ability to understand and use information in multiple formats from a wide range of sources when it's presented via computers. And when I first saw that definition, I thought, that seems reasonable to me. But actually, there's a little problem with that definition. There's one word in that definition which is now very problematic, I think. What do you think the problem word is? Computers is the problem word. So, how many people here have a mobile phone? Just put your hand up. Let's do that differently. Is there anybody in the room who does not have a mobile phone? Okay. So if you think about a normal day for you, how much time do you spend looking at a computer and how much time do you spend looking at a phone? I suspect if you're anything like me and other people I know and teachers I've met all around the world, you spend more time looking at your phone than a computer. And in fact, if you look around the world, computer use is going steadily down, and mobile use, mobile phones and tablets, is going exponentially up. So in many ways, the concept of the computer is a little bit last century. We still use them, of course, but if you compare the number of interactions, computer ones are actually a lot lower. Now the second definition comes from, does anybody think where that might come from? Where do we all get our definitions from these days? Wikipedia, which, as I'm sure you know, means that it's 100% true and accurate. And that definition says that digital literacy is the ability to locate, organize, understand, evaluate, and create information using digital technology. Now, as an English teacher, I love the first part of that definition. Why do you think I love that bit? Think about the language. What's it got? It's a list, but a list of what? Grammatically. Verbs. Thank you. It's got a lot, it's full of verbs, and verbs are good, right? Because when people are verbing, they're doing things. They're active, they're creating, they're evaluating, they're organizing and understanding. And in our classrooms, that's what we want people to be doing. We want them to be doing all these things, particularly perhaps creating. And in our line of work, it's creating language. So that's the first half. Now the second half says that digitally literate people can communicate and work more efficiently, especially with those who possess the same knowledge and skills. And when I read that part of the definition, I thought, that sounds exactly like two people who can speak the same language. Yeah? If we speak the same language, we can communicate and work more efficiently. Efficient, probably not the best word, but perhaps more pleasantly or more fulfillingly. And when you look at the literature around technology, we see a lot of these ideas connected to verbs and communication and sharing, that kind of thing. In English language teaching, we have a lot of what are called three-letter acronyms. Things like ELT, English language teaching, or EFL, English as a foreign language, or ESL, English as a second language. And in technology, you now begin to hear people speaking about DSL, digital as a second language. Okay? So now I wasn't born into a world of technology. I was born pre all of this, but I'm certainly a very competent, high-level speaker of digital, because I spend a lot of my time working with technology. And we all vary in our levels of proficiency, pretty much like language learners in many ways. But this discourse of nouns and verbs is really interesting because it's everywhere in technology. This is a quotation from a man called Marc Prensky. And some of you may have heard of Marc Prensky. He's very famous for having popularized two terms, which you may know: digital immigrant and digital native. Has anybody heard those? Okay, grand. And he said our professors, so that's you, us, our professors, he said, who are digital immigrants, see the technology as a series of programs or things, or in linguistic terms, nouns. And it's very true. When I travel and I work with teachers, they often talk about computers as things, as problems. The printer ate my paper. The computer hates me. It's often quite negative talk in many, many ways. And Prensky goes on to say that today's students, if they are native speakers, they view it in a very different way. They see technology as a means of getting things done, communicating, sharing, presenting. There's lots of verbs again. Now there are also bad verbs, things like plagiarizing and illegally copying, all sorts of other verbs. They're not all good. But you see, there's the vocabulary again, nouns and verbs. Prensky's big problem was that he thought that all of this was connected with age, that everybody over a certain age, certainly me and other people around my age, were terrible at technology, and everybody under a certain age was fantastic at technology. And we know that's not the case. In fact, technology use is never really about age. It's about attitude, about how we approach technology. And I always have a good example. My example is my father. He's 84. And when he retired at the age of 64, he got his first computer. And he went to evening classes to learn how to use Word and PowerPoint and Excel. And eventually he got an internet connection at home and he learned how to use the internet. And about 12 years ago, he changed his big computer for a laptop. And 3 years ago, he changed his laptop for a tablet, an Android tablet. He loves the Android tablet. He uses it all the time. And my father is now on Facebook at the age of 84. And I have nothing to talk to him about anymore because he knows everything I do every day. So I used to telephone him at the weekend and talk about my week. And now I phone him and I say, I went to London on Wednesday. He says, I know. I saw it on Facebook. I saw the photographs. But there's a man who is, what do we say, advancing in years, who has a great attitude to technology. And it works for him because he has a great attitude. So some of this is a little bit spurious in the way we talk about it. Young folk and old folk, there's no difference. So a few years back, along with my colleague Nikki, who's here in the audience, and a man called Marc Prensky from the University of Western Australia, we wrote a book called Digital Literacies, and we spent quite a lot of time trying to decide exactly what it meant to be digitally literate. And we divided those literacies into 4 areas. I'm just going to take you through those 4 areas, not in great detail, because that's done in the book, but just to give you an idea of how complex the picture may be. And then afterwards, I will wake you all up so that you can all talk to each other, okay? So the first literacies we said were literacies which concentrated on language, literacies focused on language. And here we have what you would call traditional literacy, print literacy, reading books, magazines, that kind of thing. But of course, reading has changed significantly in the last few years. And here we begin to talk about things like hypertext literacy. Because when you read in a book or a magazine, you have very few distractions. Particularly a book, you have the words, sometimes pictures, but mostly words. But when you read online, you have a huge quantity of distractions. You have links, you have advertisements, you sometimes have video. So when we transpose some of this activity to the classroom, reading can become potentially problematic because people have a lot more distraction around the text. So part of being hypertext literate is the ability to stay concentrated and stay focused. We also looked a little bit at what you might call new types or new genres of English. So thinking over on the right there of things like texting. Oh, my microphone's gone. Is that good? Oh, it's back. Things like texting and mobile literacies. We have text English. Now, not everybody writes in text English, but it does exist. Many people, when they go to work in large international corporations, these days have internal messaging systems, like text messages. What kind of English can you use in a multinational company on a text messaging service? Can you lol your boss? I don't know the answer. What does a job application email look like? How many people teach formal and informal letter writing? Can you put your hands up? Yeah? Okay, quite a few. Can you keep your hand up if you also teach email communication? Okay, so quite a few hands have gone down. Now think about the last time you wrote both a formal and an informal letter. It's quite rare these days. But of course email isn't. An email is a genre of English, one that's worth exploring with students. We also talk a little bit about other big themes here, things like games. I suspect all of you at some point have played games with your students. Here we're talking about maybe more complex features of gaming and scoring and competition, which, depending on where you live, is either a good or a bad thing, but introducing elements of fun and challenge into learning can, when used properly, be a useful mechanism. The next set of literacies, and these were mentioned here, we looked at, were ones that we called literacies that focus on information. So the first one, and actually the most important one I think in the world, the most important skill you can teach someone, is the ability to search effectively online. because part of the secret to a lot of this is being able to find things quickly and efficiently. How many people think they're Google search experts? Anybody? Yeah, see some hands going up? Excellent. It's a great skill. But actually, it's only one part of the puzzle, this, because finding things you can teach to people in half an hour, maybe? I could probably teach you how to use Google relatively efficiently in half an hour. But it's not actually about finding things, it's about knowing if the things you find are good or bad, truthful or not, factually correct or not, useful to you or your students or useless. And this is what we call information literacy, the ability to evaluate what we find. And a lot of that actually comes with experience, as it does in life, the ability to evaluate things. But on the web, certain skills can be taught to help people to sort out the good from the bad. And the third part of that equation we called tagging literacy. So find things, evaluate things, and then save things for later. So save things so that you can go back to them later. Now I'm very, very bad at this, incredibly bad. I have Firefox web browser, and I have over 5,000 bookmarks in my web browser, and I have no idea what any of them do at all. And every day somebody sends me an interesting link, I open the link, I think, that's interesting, I'll bookmark it and look at it later. And of course I never do. But as more and more information comes our way, we're going to have to get better at saving and storing things so we can retrieve them. Okay, the third set of literacies we called literacies that focus on connections. And these are all about how we are perceived online and how we interact with people online. So your personal literacy refers to what some people call your digital footprint, how visible you are online. How many people share photographs? How many people are not on Facebook? Not on Facebook. Okay. How many people upload photographs to Facebook regularly? Yep, quite a few. How many people upload videos to YouTube? Yep, oh wow, a lot. Okay. How many people upload photographs to Flickr, for example? Okay, not so many. How many people on Twitter? Yeah, quite a few. Okay, so as you move around the internet and you post things on Twitter and Facebook, and you put photographs and videos, all of these things combine into what's known as your digital footprint. They almost define you online. So if somebody goes to Google and puts your name in, what do they find? Do they find a very serious professional teacher? Or do they find someone who has an amazing collection of hobbies? Or someone who likes to have parties at the weekend? What kind of person do you look like online? And this has an impact on, if you're using technologies with students, of course, it has an impact on what we do with them, because at my age, I don't so much care about my digital footprint because it's huge and out of control. But if I take England as an example, the UK, when young people apply to go to universities in the UK, one of the first things that the university admission office does now is look to see if they're on Facebook, to see if they're the kind of person that they want coming to study at their university. So that's a big one. And increasingly we see people losing their jobs because of their digital footprint or social media. They say something that offends the profession they work in. A very famous one a couple of years ago, a man, he said, I'm going to, what we call in England, have a sickie, which means to pretend to be ill, so you don't have to go to work. He said, I'm going to have a sickie and go to the football. But he forgot that his boss was one of his friends on Facebook. So I'm afraid his plan didn't go very well, and actually he lost his job. So your digital footprint is actually very visible, and so is the footprint of your learners. The other ones in there, which I won't go into in great detail, the network, participatory, and intercultural, refer to how we interact with other people in online groups, how we interact with people on Facebook or on teaching groups or teacher mailing lists. You know, are you the person who's always contributing in the group? Are you the grumpy one? Are you the one who never says anything? So how do people see you within your different groups? And they all come together into a big picture of who we are online. And it's becoming more important to manage that a little bit. The last literacy area we called a focus on redesign. And actually this is predominantly a young person's thing. And this is the art of editing. We had someone mentioned editing before. The art of editing video or photographs, and combining and changing things for a specific purpose. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's for humor, for example, but it's remixing media. It's easier to give you an example, which I hope I can do. So, oh, that didn't come out very well. So one of the examples that worked for teachers, this was about 3 years ago, was teachers started making greetings cards, you know, traditional greetings cards, but with messages connected with teaching. And this is, they have a structure, and the structure is da 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 da, said no teacher ever. Okay, so da 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 da, said no teacher ever. Let's see if I can give you an example. So, I'm so glad I can go home at 3:30 to relax, said no teacher ever. And of course the point there is that teachers are overworked and they don't just get to go home at the end of the school day and relax. I'll show you a couple more. I'm enjoying such a long leisurely lunch break, said no teacher ever. Summer is going by so slowly, said no teacher ever. I do this for the money, said no teacher ever. And my favourite one, I wish a politician with no teaching experience would just come in and tell me how to teach, said no teacher ever. So this is a remix. It takes a recognizable metaphor. In this case, it's the greetings card, kind of thing you might send for a birthday or an anniversary. And it uses a particular structure to make a point. In this case, mostly points about teaching conditions, which are fairly similar in all sorts of countries around the world. Overworked, underpaid, stressed, all these kinds of things. So that's the remix. And that basically makes up the concept, or our concept, of what it means to be digitally literate. There are other interpretations I should stress. Now, I've been talking for a long time and I need to find some water. So while I'm finding some water, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to get into small groups of 3, 4, 5, depending on where you're sitting. And we're going to do the Are You Digitally Literate quiz, okay? So on the next screen, which I shall put up now, there are a few statements connected with technology use. What I would like you to do with your colleagues is, if you can answer yes to a statement, so if you can say, oh yes, that's me, I do that, then I'd like you to just give your colleagues a few more details about that particular statement, okay? So you have 2 or 3 minutes to do that, and then I'll come back to you, okay? Off you go. Okay, so I'm just going to stop you there. There was lots of murmuring, so I assume you were talking about these things. There are 8 statements on that screen. Is there anybody else in the room, apart from me, who can answer yes to all 8 of those statements? Can you put your hand up if you can answer yes? Looking around, bright lights. I've got one over there. 2 people, excellent. We can become good friends, I hope. Now, the second statement there, I check Facebook first thing in the morning. Up until recently, that statement said I check email first thing in the morning. And then I noticed that actually people had switched from checking email first thing in the morning to checking Facebook first in the morning, which is an interesting switch. In the UK, I read a survey a few months ago. In the UK, a large percentage of people check Facebook first thing in the morning before they turn over and say good morning to the person that they share their bed with, which is a sad reflection of the power of Facebook, I think. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second screen of the Are You Digitally Literate quiz. On the second screen, you're going to see some logos of websites. What I'd like you to do in your group is choose a logo and tell your colleagues what the website does. Okay, what's it for? What does it do? And then your colleagues will choose one and they'll tell you. But you've only got 60 seconds to do all of them. Okay, so you ready? 2, 1, go. So what do they do? Okay, that's it. 60 seconds has gone. You probably recognize some of these, maybe not all of them. Twitter, lots of people said they're using a short SMS service. Facebook, pretty much everyone knows. TeacherTube, yeah? So like a YouTube, but for educational videos, lots of different subjects. Is anybody old enough like me to remember Napster? Yeah? Napster used to be a very bad site for illegally downloading music. I never saw it myself, I heard about it from JJ. Wet Paint and Ning, some of you may know, they're websites where you could make group or class websites, and students could all contribute with photographs and text and things like that. Anybody on LinkedIn? Oh, lots of people. So LinkedIn is like Facebook, but for adults. Yeah? Blogger, we know, for making blogs. eBay for selling the Christmas presents that you never wanted. YouTube for video. Flickr for images, and bottom on the right, Wikipedia. Yes, I was doing this session a few weeks ago, and one of the teachers said it looks like the Death Star from Star Wars. And I thought, wouldn't that be a fantastic slogan for Wikipedia? Yeah, Wikipedia, the Death Star of learning. I said it first, I claim copyright. Okay, we're moving on to the last screen of the Are You Digitally Literate quiz, and it's the same thing. A few statements. If you can answer yes, please give your colleagues a little bit more information. You certainly do not have to answer the last one, which is an incredibly indiscreet question on my part. So 2 minutes, very quickly, find out a little bit more. Okay, I'll stop you there. I suspect that you could talk a lot longer about these things. These are a random, as I'm sure you noticed, a random set of statements about technology use. Now, if you can answer yes to a few of these and you recognize some of the logos, does it make you digitally literate? Well, I suspect that the answer is not necessarily. But what it does mean, I think, is that you are aware of things that are going on out there. And actually awareness is a good place to be, because it does at least mean that you can start thinking about how these things might be useful in your class, if you're not already using some of them. So we've had two questions. What is digital literacy, and are you digitally literate? So the third question, for me at least, is why is it important? And I think the answer is it's important because shift happens. And over the last few years, we've had an awful lot of shifts when it comes to technology. One of the shifts has occurred in the workplace, with different skills being needed sometimes, different jobs. There are jobs today that some of your students may go into, jobs that didn't exist 5 years ago. And those jobs often demand new skills and perhaps some of the literacies that I've talked about. Different countries are shifting, or some countries are shifting to this kind of an economy which is based around moving bits of information, interpreting bits of information, reformulating bits of information. We see this, you have look at the US, corporate accounts. Most US corporate accounts are done overnight in India. It's cheaper, it's quicker, it's often much better, and they're sent back the next day. Lots of medical examination, looking through samples and things, is also done outsourced to other countries. When I telephone my bank in the UK, I'm usually speaking to someone who lives in Bangalore, in India. And they talk to me about a soap opera on British telly, and they tell me how bad the weather is where I live. And they have all this fabulous information to make me feel at home, but it's all done somewhere else. Programming, computer programming, Romania, Poland, India again, and increasingly places like Vietnam and the Philippines. There are all sorts of jobs, new jobs that didn't exist 5 years ago, and I suspect in 5 years' time there will be even more new jobs that we can't even imagine. I never imagined that there will be such a job as a search engine optimization agent, but there is a job, and it's very well paid. So one of the things that makes this concept of literacy important, I think, is that by giving people, or by helping people to acquire these skills, we can possibly make them more ready to go into this very fluid and very complex workplace that they may go into. So that's one reason why it's important, this kind of shift, certainly when it comes to their futures and their careers. But there are other shifts. Not many people know that Google was actually an information service long before the internet happened. And they basically had a worldwide database of libraries and their contents. And you could, in the old days, prior to the internet, you could fill in one of these and put a stamp on it and send it to Google, and they would do some research into your local libraries, and they would send you back some suggestions of where you could find the information you were looking for. If you fast forward 20 years to today, you go along to Google, right? You type something in, and it says, I don't know what it says. You type in Australia, and it says 64 million results, 0.06 seconds. That's a huge difference from the old to the new. The speed of access we have to information is phenomenal, quite scary sometimes. But it's there, and it's constantly, I'm sure you know this, constantly coming at you every day. Just before I move on, I should say that this is an invention. Okay, this never happened. Google didn't exist before the internet. You could never post things off. Don't go home and tell your husbands and wives that you learnt an amazing thing about Google today, because they're just going to say, who told you? And you'll say, that Gavin Dewdney. And I'll say, what a stupid man he is. And I don't want them all to think that of me, so please don't, this didn't happen, okay? It's purely illustrative. Other changes, or one of the other big changes is in mobility. So this is a mobile computer from the 1980s, 1990s, 2000. Does anybody remember those little Sony things that were keyboard shaped? They're about this long. So you couldn't really put them in your back pocket. But we go, you see, we go smaller and smaller and smaller and lighter, with more battery and more access to information, with constant internet connections. Some of us, if we have 3G or 4G, I don't know how many Gs you have here. How many Gs do you have? Any advance on 4? Got 4? Well, you're lucky, because where I live, I only have 3 Gs. And they're quite slow Gs as well. So there we are. We have a little device that fits neatly in our pocket, and the battery, unless you have an iPhone, the battery lasts all day. And you have access to all this fabulous knowledge anytime you like. In the old days, people used to go for dinner, and you probably remember this. Someone would go, what's the name of that man in that film? And someone would go, what film's that? You know, the gangster film. Oh, you know, the blonde man. He wasn't James Bond. And you could have that conversation for an hour and a half over dinner until somebody remembered the name of that person. Now, of course, that conversation lasts approximately 1 minute. Someone looks it up, and that's it. And then everybody eats their dinner in silence and goes home unhappily. But we do have this access to all this fabulous information, and what's the most incredible thing about that is what we do with those devices, for all sorts of reasons. What we do with those devices is we ask people to turn them off and put them in their bags. Yeah? Because wouldn't it be terrible if they had access to all that information too? What would we do? I've got an answer for that in a workshop tomorrow afternoon. But I'm interested particularly, and with my colleague Nikki, particularly interested in what mobile can do for us. And I'm not talking about smartphones with internet connections necessarily. I'm talking about phones that could be 5 or 8 years old, no internet connection, but phones that have fabulous things for language learning in them. A place to take notes, something to record audio on, a way to take photographs, a way to record video, ways of recording and playing with language. So it's not all high tech. So that's mobility, and I think that's another one of the big shifts. So we've got this kind of knowledge economy thing, we've got access, we've got mobility, the fact that we can carry our learning, some of our learning, around with us, which presents interesting learning opportunities. And then we have one more shift, and that's the shift in them, our learners. They don't all look like that, of course. Some of them look quite different. But they've changed too, and I'm not one of those people who thinks that we have to pander to the desires of our students all the time, but I am someone who's interested in working out the good things that they bring to class, not necessarily technology, all sorts of other things that they bring to class, and working out how I can assimilate some of those and use them in what I do. So lots and lots of changes. But there's one change that really hasn't happened, and it doesn't matter where you live in the world. The one big change is that lots and lots of teachers are incredibly worried, sometimes a little bit frightened, often depressed about technology. It happens everywhere. And it's never the teacher's fault. Most of this comes primarily from a lack of training, which I'll talk about in a minute. But when I talk to teachers about technology, what's the one thing that teachers all around the world will say? What do you think it is? Apart from it breaks all the time, which is not true. The one thing they say is, I don't use technology with my students because they're so tech savvy. My students are so tech savvy that I don't feel I have the skills or the confidence or the experience to use technology. And I was struck by a quote from a man called Mike Sansone. He said that actually students are not tech savvy at all. We all know the root of the word savvy, right? Savvy comes from knowledge. But they're not knowledgeable about technology. He said what they are, what younger folk, for want of a better word, young people are what he said, tech comfy. They are comfortable with technology. It doesn't upset them, it doesn't frustrate them, doesn't make them angry, they're not afraid of it, they're very comfortable with it. And that's great. But it doesn't mean that they know how to take that comfort and that technology and make it work for them in their learning. And actually that's where we fit in, I think. It's not knowing how technology works. It's not explaining to someone how to use Word or PowerPoint or whatever. It's helping them use the skills that they have in the service of their education and their learning. It's a very human approach to technology, and it's something I think that we would do very, very well. And we're just lacking one thing, I think, which is confidence. And just to finish off, the last question, what does it mean for teachers? I'm going to answer more fully in a workshop tomorrow. But I do want to say one thing, and that's about where we stand in our profession in terms of our training. And this is a very famous model called the TPAC model. And basically, in summary, and this holds true for pretty much every country I've visited, when we train to become teachers, we learn two principal things. We learn, on the one hand, the content knowledge, so we learn what we're going to teach. Could be English, could be mathematics, geography, physics, you name it. We learn the content, and then we learn how to teach it. So we acquire content knowledge on the one hand, and we acquire pedagogical knowledge on the other hand. And together, they pretty much equip us to go into a class and do our job. If you want to add technology into that, and I'm not necessarily saying you should, it's completely up to you, but if you do want to add technology into it, then you need to complete this model somehow. And the model is completed with a third sphere, technological knowledge, hence the model's name, TPAC. And that basically says that we need to know how to teach, what to teach, and the role that technology may play in what we do. And as I say, it's not about tools, it's not about learning about how to use PowerPoint, for want of a better example. It's about learning about how PowerPoint can be used in classes, what presentations are good and bad for, how they fit into what we do. It's not about tools, it's about skills. And that brings me right back to the beginning, really. Acquiring some of these skills, helping learners to acquire those skills and making them a slightly more natural process is a good thing if you can do it, I think. Adding in a layer of digital literacy sometimes in the classroom can be very helpful for learners. And tomorrow in the workshop I hope to explore that a little bit longer. You have been sitting here for an incredibly long time. I thank you very, very much for your patience. Enjoy the rest of the conference.